Well, we're back at the bench with the generator, and I've managed to get all the important stuff buttoned up and reassembled here. Nothing too crazy. Putting it together was very easy. There are a few small pieces I have not installed, mostly the hardware that goes over the bearing on the end there, and I don't have a good fuse for it yet. I got to figure out the dimensions of it because this fuse holder here is pretty short. And this is a standard 3AG glass fuse. Diameter's correct, but if you try to stuff that in there, this is a little tricky to see. The actual available space, there's a good half-inch push sticking out there, and I cannot push it any further in. It's up against the thermal overload contacts there, so that ain't gonna work. They must be as short as the kinds you used to find old Christmas lights. Anyway, in order to get it back together, well, obviously the first thing I did was to repair the main connection to the cutout relay, which I have mounted on top. The cover for it I'm painting at the moment. So I considered replacing the original output wire, but realized that this is pretty flexible, and the wire that I knew I could get in 10 gauge was not going to be very flexible. I did order brand new crimp on terminals. They're called flag terminals from Restoration Supply Co. These have a number 10 hole in them, which appears to be correct despite the fact they're being attached with number 6 or number 8 hardware. They must have had a good deal on them when the car was new, or when Delco was making these generators. Either way, I decided to reuse this. I clipped off the bad end, and then I sleeved the wiring with some high temperature insulation that a radio club member gave me. I'm not entirely sure what this is, if it's nylon or what, but I believe I've seen this used on like the igniters in gas furnaces or similar applications where you gotta deal with a lot of heat. Well, nylon wouldn't be very good for that, now would it? Either way, this stuff is pretty good. It's reasonably flexible. The only problem is it's white. My solution was to just hose the thing down with a little bit of automotive trim paint, which I assumed would be relatively flexible. Now, whether or not it actually adheres well to this material, I don't know. It's stuck on there, but when I put the wire in, it peeled some of the paint off, and yeah, my solution has just been to take a Sharpie marker and touch up on the exposed area. This little section out here is all I really cared about, and honestly, the aesthetics are secondary to making sure we don't get any shorts. But I mean, if I had to, I think a Sharpie would work just fine. This material might be a little too smooth to accept paint. Either way, got that fixed. The new end, I crimped it on, and then I also filled it with solder, just to make absolutely sure. It looks like the originals were both attached mechanically and were either spot welded or soldered. I would bet it was soldered. It just really didn't want to come apart. So that's back in there. The brushes, I left the brushes alone. There's plenty of meat on those. Making the electrical connections was easy. And the whole thing just slides together, 2 bolts to reassemble it. The armature just slides in. Well, actually, I attached the armature to the end cap first, put the bearing in, put the nut on, held that in place, and then shoved the whole thing in through the body because you have to dodge the field coil wires to get it in there. And then once that was in place, put the bolts in from the end, and that's it. Easy peasy. I did have a bit of an issue trying to noodle out how these 2 pieces of metal fit back in. Obviously, the spacer at the end, I remembered that, but this guy, this washer, I found hanging around the end of the commutator, and it didn't really make sense to me why that was there. It was a little mangled. I checked the exploded diagram from the Franklin catalog, and it turns out this is actually supposed to be inside the bearing in here. This is, according to the catalog, an oil barrier. So for the oil cup on here is going to splash all and around the race there. This actually has a raised section that I realized is intended to fit into, and now it's not going to come back out, to fit into the center of the bearing around the ball carrier. So this raised section right there fits inside, and then the spacer on the end sits on top of that, and then the little cover plate at the end sits on top of that. So I'll get those back in once the piece is done drying. But we can put this back in the car now because I finally got off my butt and made the gasket for it. This is not my most beautiful piece of work, I'll be honest. I was mostly using the remnants of the previous gasket, which after looking at it I realized is also a copy because it's very crudely cut. But it does meet the thickness spec. This is actually stencil material from work. We had put in one of our steel punches and used for stenciling big equipment. But this should work out pretty well. It's fairly firm, shouldn't flop around, and it matches the pattern nicely. Actually, because I only had the lower section, I cut the bulk of it out, left a whole bunch at the top, and then I put it over the end and traced around the ears to get everything else, and it'll work. So that can go back in. I've got the hardware ready for it, and I'll meet you back over at the car. I apologize for the background music. My neighbors are having a bit of a party. Anyway, generator is back in. Not too hard to get back in there. Interestingly, I got it back in with the draft tube, I think, in its original position. I don't know why it was such a pain getting it out the first time, and I had to rotate this to clear it, but yeah, it went right back in with no trouble. Weird, but whatever. I did use flat washers on the upper tabs as specified by the catalog. That'll prevent these things from cracking again instead of using lock washers. There is a brand new lock washer on the bottom and an appropriate heavy nut, an original heavy nut that I had on there to hold it. So that's all good. I got the cover for the cutout relay reinstalled, and now all I got to do is get the last little bits of hardware on the end of the bearing here. So first we've got our oil cover with the indentation facing toward the inside of the bearing. And then very carefully got to make sure the screws don't try to run away. Got our bearing spacer that goes in like that, and probably will not stay there. No, it is not. Nothing is going to stay there. So we're going to have to follow it up with the cover. And then get that on there. Slide this around. And I have spun the engine over with the hand crank to make sure everything rotates the way it should. That all appears to be fine. I'm not going to put the cover back on until I'm ready to move the third brush around, because I'm not sure where it needs to be set. I don't actually know which way is increase or decrease on this thing. It could be a max output for all I know. And also I still need to get a fuse, which I believe, having looked at some charts, is probably a 1 AG size fuse, which are about 5/8 of an inch long, give or take. That seems to be about right. I couldn't find any on McMaster cars, sadly. They don't sell any that small, so I'll have to hit up some local parts houses, hardware stores, and see if I can't get it there. Okay, well, since I have all the hardware and I have all the gaskets and materials, I guess the only logical thing to do now is to finish reassembling the exhaust system. I have the main manifold mocked up, held in place with the new bolts here, and I have the crossover pipe currently sitting on top of the car that's going to go from here over towards the intake manifold. What I want to do first is just get the gaskets in here, loosely tighten these, because there's several pieces that all have to align with each other for this system to work well, and I don't want to do the final tightening until they're all in position. So I'm going to bust out the key graphite paste for all the high temperature connections here, spec'd by Franklin. And as for the gaskets, while Olson's does make a kit, I went with the Franklin Club member that makes his from scratch. More importantly, while Olson's uses modern gasket material for exhaust systems like this stuff, which is fine, it's what was on the car previously, the original specification is one of these more of a sandwich cookie designs, which is copper backed, and originally I think it would have been an asbestos filling. This is probably a fiberglass or some other type of high temperature material stuffed between there, and then the edges are folded over. And these are all made by hand, from what I can tell. So these should be reusable, according to Jeff Haslin, who makes them. And I have a full set for all of that. So I'm going to put on some nitrils and then take you through putting all this together on time lapse.
Okay, future Matt here. The process for installing the exhaust manifold on this car was a little trickier than I anticipated. What I'm doing right now is applying key graphite paste to either side of the copper sandwich gaskets, and then I'm attempting to slide them in between the flanges between the cylinder heads and the manifold itself. My thinking was that if I just tried to stick them to the flanges on the manifold itself and hoist it into position and press it against the engine, they'd probably all just fall off. In hindsight, it seems that if I'd let the graphite paste basically dry out a little bit, they may have actually glued themselves to the surface, and I might have been able to get away with that. Didn't think about that at the time. These have a lot of solvent in them, so they get kind of runny, and it creates quite a bit more mess than I anticipated. And I mentioned that after the time lapse, actually. Um, yeah, the camera's not in a great place to really show what I'm doing, but I'm kind of lifting up on the manifold, shoving the gasket in between, and then some of the graphite pieces squeezing its way out and making a bit of a mess of things at the bottom. So I cleaned it up as best I could. And I've only got two bolts holding that manifold onto the engine, one at either end. And then once I have all the gaskets kind of in place, I put a bolt through each one to keep it from just dropping off the block, because I can't really squeeze it together without making it impossible to get the next one in without shaving all the graphite paste off. Now, I did buy reproduction bolts for the car. They're from Restoration Supply Co. They are high-crowned bolts. They have a domed top head, which is pretty close to the factory original bolts. I don't have any of the original hardware for the exhaust manifold, unfortunately. As far as I can tell, they were actually a drilled lock wire style bolt that you typically see in aircraft applications. Makes sense. I don't know where you'd even get those. As far as I can tell, I would probably have to make them. But in this case, it was just easier to buy already heat-treated bolts that look close enough, and I don't think anyone's going to complain. Now, the other half of the exhaust manifold wraps around the engine and actually joins up with the intake manifold. So the unit that I'm applying right here is the gasoline heater, which will vaporize, or was originally intended to vaporize, the poor quality oily gasoline that was available in the 20s and 30s. Not so much necessary today, but there's no real getting around it. I just have to reinstall it, and it is a solid aluminum casting. And I did leave the entire intake manifold assembly loosely attached, so I didn't torque down any of the nuts on there, so that when the exhaust manifold was fitted up, I could get everything, all the surfaces flush and mated together properly. And then once the exhaust is done, then I can crank down all the intake attachments. And in fact, the instructions for the intake do state to leave everything loose first, get the major mating surfaces done, then crank down the cylinders, etc. Unfortunately, I bought the wrong length bolts for the gasoline heater, so I wasn't able to completely tighten these connections down yet.
Well, I was kind of hoping it would go a little smoother than that. I underestimated the mess that could be created by graphite paste. I've also discovered it seems quite resilient against most solvents. Anything I get it on seems to be permanently stained. There's probably some other chemicals I can try, but once it gets on aluminum, it seems pretty happy to stay put, which is unfortunate. Spent a lot of time cleaning all this. Anyway, it's all going to get hot. It's probably going to burn off anyway. It doesn't really matter. But all the gaskets are in place for the main part of the exhaust system and for the upper half of the intake. Gaskets for the carburetor, that comes later. The carburetor still needs to be rebuilt. However, I went through this whole thing and forgot one little detail. The bolts on the gasoline heater here, which uses the exhaust gases to preheat the intake air, that was because the gasoline at the time was fairly oily, didn't really combust all that well, and you needed every bit of help you could get, especially in cold weather. Not much real use nowadays, but you can't really eliminate it. I mean, I suppose you could, but either way. I didn't think to get 7/16 lock washers for the bolts that attach here. I had plenty of 3/8 and 5/16. I didn't get any for these guys, which really, really sucks. But everything is loosely in position, and more importantly, it all lines up pretty well. Seems like the thickness of the gaskets and everything else is working out pretty nicely. Can I retrieve this? There we go. So that's good. Over here on the exhaust manifold, sorry I didn't really have a great line of sight on this. I had to be in here, and this was trickier than I thought. When I imagined slipping the gaskets up in there, I kind of figured on this stuff sticking on. I imagine if I'd left the gaskets with the graphite paste on them out for a while so that the solvent would evaporate, then it'd be easy enough to just stick them on the surface. Probably should have done that. A lot of it seems to be drying right now. But these are all brand new high crown bolts. I don't think Franklin actually used high crown. They used crown bolts with the rounded top, but these are probably twice the height of the ones that I do have as originals on the car so far. So all the intake bolts are original. But these, they're pretty close. They look right. They look period appropriate. If I wanted to, I could shave them down on my lathe. I might do that in the future, but for now, this is good enough. And the extra head height means they're a little easier to get a wrench on and put some oomph on them if I need to. All the nuts, however, are the original heavy nuts, brand new black oxide washers. And cylinder number 1 has some extra stuff going on. All these guys use about 1.5 inches, 5/16 18 bolt. The number 1 cylinder uses 2-inch bolts. So I'll have to use my camera here. But on number 1 cylinder, we have this bracket hanging down. This is actually the 1/2 of the thermostat. So while it does not have a radiator, it does still have a thermostat. Starting with the Series 11 cars, when they went to the completely redesigned front with the false radiator, they also included a thermostatically operated set of shutters. Now on water-cooled cars, you could actually get what they called a winter front as an option. A variety of sellers made them. And essentially it was a set of louvers on the front that you'd bolt on over the existing radiator shell, and a copper bellows in the top of it would keep them closed during cold weather and then slowly open them up as the engine gets warmer. Allows for better expansion and contraction cycles of the metal in the engine. It's just, it's better for it long term than rather than rapidly heating up a very cold engine. It's not great for metal. Anyway, on the air-cooled car, same basic principle, except all this is doing is choking the intake air that the fan is trying to pull in through the front grille. There's supposed to be a rod that comes out of the copper bellows. There is a small bracket on the front of the fan housing here with a rotating point that I may have to remove the powder coating from in order to fit everything on there. It's also a little bent. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, I do have the complete front assembly for this car. Unfortunately, it's in pretty bad shape. It's not horrifically bent or anything, but it was taken apart, tossed in a pile, and the tops and bottoms of all of the louvers have holes in them that are supposed to engage with studs, and then the studs are supposed to have springs on them. And a lot of the holes are either wallowed out, the metal is cracked around them, so it would have to be repaired. And it's kind of just a pile, and I really need to go through it all the way. It is not necessary for the car to run, and I could easily just put the shell back on, put the bug screen back on it, and drive it as is. It's not the end of the world. It's kind of like disabling the flaps on an air-cooled VW if you live in California or somewhere where it just doesn't get cold enough to warrant that, I guess. But long-term, yes, I am going to put the copper bellows back in. There used to be people that would rebuild them, because over time they can fail if the solder joint at the back opens up and the vapor inside leaves, which I can't quite remember exactly what it is. It's a fairly common, I think it's like isopropyl alcohol. It's a specific variety of alcohol that you put in a certain volume of it, seal it up, and then when it gets hot enough, it vaporizes and then presses outward on the bellows and expands it. Mine is sort of stuck at a partially expanded point. It will get bigger, so it will open up, but it will not close all the way as it did originally. Interestingly, that's not really much of a problem because the Franklin service manuals, or the service bulletins, note that at some point, for the sake of appearances only, they told technicians to adjust the copper bellows so that it would leave the louvers open slightly at all times, instead of completely closing them, because apparently it looked better. The grill bars were either painted enamel black, some I guess were painted body color, some were even done in chrome, and there's a huge debate about which was actually the factory option. I would lean towards black enamel, because the instructions also state that the chrome strip that runs down the center of the grill could be painted in black enamel to match the grill bars so that it makes it disappear or whatever. Again, silly styling reasons for making changes to the car. Anyway, I've got this in here. Originally, the housing for the thermostat was riveted to it. I took the whole thing apart to clean it out and sandblast it. I'm going to reassemble it with hard screws and nuts, 440 screws and nuts instead, to make it easy to service should I need to. Not factory correct, but a hell of a lot easier to deal with. And I think that's going to do it for this little installment. I got more done than I thought I would. I'll get some hardware ordered up for this, and then once that's in here, I'll be able to crank down all these connections and get all the gaskets seated. I am going to have to bust out the original exhaust pipe that comes off of the gasoline heater and is supposed to go to the muffler mounting brackets for temporary use in order to test the engine. I do have a complete new exhaust system coming from Waldron's. If you have a Franklin, not only can they custom make the designs, they already have several of the most common Franklin models in their system. So if you go on their website, Waldron's Exhaust, they do actually have series 11 through 18 Franklin exhausts, and I think even for some of the older cars. And if they don't have it on their website, they can make it provided you have the drawings. They do work for Jay Leno, so it's pretty good quality. I will say it is not cheap, and their lead time right now is a minimum of 10 to 12 weeks. So I'm not expected to get my stuff probably till almost November, maybe Christmas. Either way, I've got a complete system. It's going to have a new downpipe, new muffler, and a new tailpipe, because the one that I have is holier than the Pope. But that's going to do it. And next section, I'll probably be dealing with more painting on the rear axle. I need to get all of that ready to finish off the brake system. That way I can pressurize it and see how many leaks I have. But until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.